What is a witch wound? And more importantly, what is a witch? We think we know what witches are, right? We grew up with them since we were kids. Those nasty, mean old ladies who may or may not have green skin, dark hair, a black pointed hat, a big crooked nose, casting magic spells at night with their cauldron, their black cat, and flying on their broomstick in front of the moon. But where did that myth actually come from and why? So to understand this, I would first recommend watching the video I just made about Adam and Eve. You should watch this as a primer for probably any video on this channel. And that's going to explain to you the origins of societal gender roles. And we're going to have to go back to that myth for a moment to understand where the first witch in history came from, which I believe is a woman named Lilith. Yes, I believe Lilith is the first ever recorded witch in human history. Now, who is Lilith? For those who don't know, Lilith is supposedly Adam's first wife before Eve ever even existed. And she's sort of been like wiped from the history books because apparently it didn't go so well. Lilith refused to lie underneath Adam as anything less than his equal. She would not be objectified. She did not want to be placed into a hierarchy. She did not see herself as less than Adam. She was not subservient, and this was apparently a problem. So I guess when they broke up, she was cast out of the Garden of Eden, and she became this mythical, evil, dark feminine figure who haunts the lands and eats children. Then Eve is created from Adam's rib and agrees to be made into a scapegoat and to be made subservient and less than Adam. And she becomes the first example of what we would call a good woman. And this dichotomy between these two women, the first good woman and the first bad woman, is the first example of the sisterhood of women being split into two halves. And this was done to prevent women from unifying and therefore owning our own power as a collective, unified whole. So some women were perceived as being good, of the light, and some women were perceived as being bad and dark. This also sets the stage for how we perceive different colors in society, which will be an entirely other video about racism. There will also be an entirely other video about the Cinderella syndrome, about what the good woman goes through as being the better half of the female collective and her trials and tribulations, because in this mythos of Adam and Eve and Lilith and the division of women, there are no women that actually win. Despite the evil reputation that witches may have, witches are not actually bad. Primarily, witches are spiritually awakened women who are connected to the source of true being and are able to harness that power as a form of magic. And this is extremely threatening to the idea of women as subservient objects. Now, the true reality, as I discussed in my first video about Adam and Eve, is that the same core source of true being exists equally in all beings, which means it is equally in Adam as it is equally in Eve, making Adam and Eve totally equal counterparts, spiritually speaking. But in the myth of Adam and Eve, Adam is placed higher on that hierarchy. And so there's now a tension between women who accept that narrative and women who do not. The women who accept that narrative, who accept blame, who accept being objectified, or who are unaware of it and simply are processed into that system, become the good women, the Cinderellas of the story. And the women like Lilith, who don't accept that, become the bad women, and therefore the witches. Women who were threatening, historically, to the toxic patriarchy and the narrative of the church were labeled witches, were branded as practicing evil, bad magic in a partnership with the devil or Satan, and were then put on trial and publicly humiliated, and then most oftentimes murdered in some sort of nasty way, whether it was being burned at the stake or hung. Another example of a witch who we all sort of know as being publicly tried, humiliated, and murdered was a woman named Joan of Arc. Now, we'll talk about her later as well. She was later on exonerated of being a witch and made into a saint, but only if she was a saint within the structure of the male-dominated Catholic Church. So her sainthood did not actually do anything to exonerate all the other women who were tried and murdered as witches. So what is a witch wound then? Because in today's society, we don't still burn women or try them for being witches, but there is still a pervasive social stigma of being called a witch. When a woman is nasty, you might choose to call her a witch. When a woman is spiritually awake and you don't understand the rituals she's doing, which are a form of self-love and magic, you might call her a witch. If you are a man and you think you don't have a witch wound, you would be mistaken, because the witch wound is about the fear of being perceived as spiritually awake in a divine feminine type of way, meaning that you're in touch with your intuition, that you go with the flow of life, that you embrace the dark, unknown side of life that is where actually we are all birthed from the darkness of the womb itself. And we still have a persistent fear of these types of things. And so the witch wound, whether you're male or female, is something you will likely come across in your own process of spiritual awakening at some point. The witch wound is the fear of being seen and perceived and treated as a witch, as a bad, dark, feminine figure. It is also a prime example of what happens to women if they refuse to accept blame, if they refuse to be a scapegoat and refuse to be made into an object, and therefore placed lower in a hierarchy. And it's not a good result. It's a form of being exterminated from the planet, or in today's society, maybe just simply experiencing the rejection of being labeled a witch in your social circles. So this witch wound actually still persists to this day and is something that needs to be brought into the light of awareness so that we can collectively begin to heal from the myth that women are practicing some kind of evil magic if they do not agree to be blamed for other people's pain. Again, you're going to want to watch the intro video I made about Adam and Eve to understand the all-pervasive dynamics of blame in our society. We need to begin to reclaim the word witch and all of the meaning behind it. We need to remember that it's okay to be perceived as magical and independent and powerful in our own spiritual truth. We need to remember that within ourselves as women, and we also need the divine masculine to remember that sacred feminine side of himself, so that we can also bond between the genders and begin to heal a rift that has caused fear and hate and violence against women 4 centuries. We are at an extraordinary period of time in history where we now have the tools and understanding to do this. So join me in future videos to further unpack this, and also check out my upcoming podcast where we begin to find ways to reclaim the word and the meaning of what it is to be a modern day witch. In 2018, I had an allergic reaction to an ear piercing that radically changed my life. Luckily, due to a unique spiritual awakening, I was able to come off of prednisone and reclaim my life. I believe that what I learned during all those years of pain and suffering can help you overcome your problems too. For my spiritual teachings, check out my website, my YouTube, and my book.